Welcome back to another episode of What's Up, Prof. Hello, Walter.
Good day, Martin.
Are you well?
Yes, I think I'm doing all right.
That's good.
Under the circumstances.
Yes. Very uncertain days that we still live in.
Yes.
So let's talk about it. Let's open with a word of prayer. Oh, Heavenly Father, thank you so much for bringing us together again. Thank you that we can have these discussions. We ask that you please enlighten our minds with the Holy Spirit and bless this discussion. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Now, the very title is again somewhat problematic.
Mm-hmm.
Vaccination, green passports, and bioethics. Now, I don't think we will change our stance.
Yeah.
We are not going to be prescriptive in any way. It is a question of choice, isn't it?
Correct.
The problem today is that in order to make a choice, there must be options available.
Yes.
And we do not find many options in the mainstream.
Mm-hmm.
So we put together a few things here, and thank you for working on it,
Yeah.
about vaccination, green passports, and bioethics, to see what the credible alternative views are,
Mm-hmm.
which in no way implies that we are necessarily very one-sided in our view, but nevertheless we deem it necessary that people should be aware that there are two sides to every story.
Yes.
Maybe three or maybe even four.
Exactly. We're not changing the way that we present it. The choice is with the viewers and every person individually.
Correct.
We're just showing some information that's not always so mainstream.
Now, there's one thing that sets us apart. I'm talking now as Adventists.
Mm-hmm.
And that is that our message is not limited to the spiritual side, but also has a health component.
Correct.
And a very prominent and important health component. Now, if you read your Bible, you will find that the health component there was also very prominent.
Yes.
There were restrictions on what to eat. There were restrictions on many issues pertaining to foods, unclean and otherwise. There were particular diets that God's people were placed upon in the wilderness experience, with which they were not always very pleased.
Mm-hmm.
And the health component was always part and parcel of the religious experience in Bible times.
Correct. You've got the Daniel story as well.
Correct. And so we cannot uncouple this aspect of the message. And this is why we want to bring this side of the issue in as well, so that people can make informed choices. So we'll start with some controversial statements by a very credible source. I don't think we'll quote Aunt Sevi, but the sources that we have
The aunt that will quote.
The aunts that we quote will be credible. Here is one from the Spirit of Prophecy. The influence you have gained in the medical profession is large and broad. She's speaking to a very prominent doctor in those times. And in some respect, it has been as God would have it. You have caused the light God has given you to shine forth to others. And this light has influenced others to labor in the different lines of the medical work. But according to the light the Lord has given me, something of the spirit of Freemasonry exists and has built a wall about the work. The old regular practice has been exalted as the only true method for the treatment of disease. And to a large degree, this feeling has leavened the physicians connected with you. They have resorted to drugs in cases of fever to break it up, as they have thought. This method has broken up fevers and other diseases, but it has, in some cases, broken up the whole man with it. The Lord has been pleased to present this matter before me in clear lines. Fever cases need not be treated with drugs. The most difficult cases are best and most successfully managed by nature's own resources. This science, fully adopted, will bring the best results if the practitioners will be thorough. The Lord will bless the physician who depends on natural methods, helping every function of the human machinery to act in its own strength, the part the Lord designed it to act in restoring itself to proper action. The medical fraternity, represented to me as Freemasonry, with their long, unintelligible names, which common people cannot understand, would call the Lord's prescription for Hezekiah quackery. Death was pronounced upon the king, but he prayed for life, and his prayer was heard. Those who had the care of him were told to get a bunch of figs and put them on the sore, and the king was restored. This means was taken by God to teach them that all their preparations were only depriving the king of the power to rally and overcome disease. While they pursued their course of treatment, his life could not be saved. The Lord diverted their minds from their wonderful mysteries to a simple remedy of nature. Now, people will immediately say that applies to that time, when the medical world was not advanced as it is now. But today, the medical world is very much a captive of the pharmaceutical world.
Yes.
And this is where the problem lies, because drugs don't heal. They may create a milieu in which healing can take place, but often they have side effects which could be worse than the original disease. And in one of my previous lectures, I showed data that the number 3 cause of death was prescribed
medication.
Prescribed medicine.
Sure.
So if you have adverse reactions to medicine, that could be one thing, or incompatibility between various medicines, and even incompatibility with the medicine and the human system. Nowhere does she condemn the medical world, but she has very strong words about those that rely largely on the pharmaceutical side of the medical world. Whereas if you created the natural environment for a body to heal itself, it would be very advantageous. No medicine can heal. Only the body's own mechanisms can heal. And this is very important for the discussion that we are going to enter in. So let us just qualify that with another statement or two that can put this in its right perspectives. Drugs never cure disease. That's an axiom. Even today, it is still an axiom. As I said, you can create the circumstances, but you cannot do the healing.
Correct.
Only the body itself can heal itself. Now, Martin, that is an amazing thing when you think about it. So let's say you have an injury and you've destroyed something, let's say something in your hand or something. Then the body's own mechanism jumps into action, removes the damaged part. There are cells that will gobble up anything that shouldn't be there or any blood that has flown.
If you've got a thorn, it works itself out.
And it will restore itself. Now imagine if our vehicles were like that. Wouldn't it be wonderful?
Yes, you had an accident, you leave it overnight, and tomorrow when you come out,
it's already healing. And this by itself is just a miracle. And the greatest ingenuity of humanity over the eons has not managed to duplicate it.
Correct.
So this is a very true statement. Drugs never cure disease. They only change its form and location. When drugs are introduced into the system, for a time they seem to have a beneficial effect. A change may take place, but the disease is not cured. It will manifest itself in some other form. The disease which the drug was given to cure may disappear, but only to reappear in a new form, such as skin diseases, ulcers, painful diseased joints, and sometimes in a more dangerous and deadly form. Nature keeps struggling, and the patient suffers with different ailments until there is a sudden breaking down in her efforts and death follows. That is exactly what happens today. Very often you receive a drug, prescribed drug, and that drug has such a detrimental side effect that you have to take another drug to counteract the side effect, which in turn produces another side effect, which needs another drug to counter that side effect, and in the end you're taking a handful of pills for one ailment.
Yeah.
And that is not something that is linked to this time period when this was written.
No.
This is happening
Today.
Mm-hmm. Here's another quote. The practitioners are very much in earnest in using their dangerous concoctions, and I'm decidedly opposed to resorting to such things. They never cure. They may change the difficulty to create a worse one. Many of those who practice the prescribing of drugs would not take the same or give them to their children. If they have an intelligent knowledge of the human body, if they understand the delicate, wonderful human machinery, they must know that we are fearfully and wonderfully made, and that not a particle of these strong drugs should be introduced into this human living organism. This is very sound advice. Mm-hmm. And in as far as it is possible, the natural remedies should be employed. Allopathy has its place, but naturopathy should be the choice. Then shall physicians continue to resort to drugs, which leave a deadly evil in the system, destroying that life which Christ came to restore? Christ's remedies cleanse the system, but Satan has tempted man to introduce into the system that which weakens the human machinery, clogging and destroying the fine, beautiful arrangement of God. The drugs administered to the sick do not restore but destroy. Drugs never cure. Instead, they place in the system seeds which bear a very bitter harvest. Now, there will immediately be some that will rebel against these statements, given the kind of information that has been placed in the world.
Correct.
But I can tell you categorically from personal experience that these statements are absolutely true.
Isn't it the same then with your body? That if you put in things that's not supposed to be there, it will also not work properly.
Absolutely. The fuel that you put inside the vehicle and the fuel that you put inside your body determines the working of the machinery. That's just a fact. And we've presented many lectures on health in the past, and that was my area of research when I was associated with the university. And I had a fascinating discussion with Dr. Campbell, the one from the China study.
Yeah.
And we aired it the other day.
Yes, it's on our channel.
Yes. So, these are things that people have discovered, and the resistance to this day against this kind of information is actually quite amazing. There are some people who have started to see that there's a benefit in a healthy lifestyle, but most people know it but ignore it. With this background in mind, Martin, we have in the world today a situation which has come about because of the pandemic, where there's a lot of information out there, and people are confused. And some of them are even scared and do not know exactly which way they should go. And much of the information that is out there does not get to the public.
Yep.
Because there seems to be a suppression
Yes.
of much of the information that is available out there. Now, my contention is simply this. If there is a very important issue where people must make informed choices, then shouldn't all the information be there, out there, available to them?
We experienced it firsthand. One of our videos was suppressed on YouTube for a while.
Yes, but they put it back.
Yes, but you see, most of these type of information out there,
Yes,
you never get, it's not up and open to the public.
correct. Because with that particular video, we appealed, and people had probably not seen it, but because there were certain key words in it, they removed it. But on appeal, they put it back. Now, there is much information out there, and it seems to me that the media is very selective in what they let through and what they don't let through. So, for the sake of the debate, it is necessary that we look at some of these issues so that we can make informed choices. Now, the information that we will be putting forward is from reliable sources. In other words, it's not from alternative sources, but from prominent individuals and in normal media.
Yes.
And yet, it is still being withheld from the public.
And even if it's not withheld, it's not made prominent in the media.
Now, this man, Geert van den Bosch, is a very, very prominent scientist in the field of vaccination. And he was actually instrumental in the development of that which we see in the world today. And he recently raised the alarm and had a few interesting things to say. So let's have a look at what he says, and then we can talk about it.
Dear colleagues at the WHO, my name is Geert van den Bosch. My background is veterinary medicine. I'm a certified expert in microbiology and infectious diseases. I have a PhD in virology, and I have a long-standing career in human vaccinology. I'm urging you to immediately open the scientific debate on how human interventions in the COVID-19 pandemic are currently driving viral immune escape. I'm urging you to invite me for a scientific hearing open to the public and to scientists all over the world on this very topic. And that is why I'm saying that these vaccines, I mean, in their own right, are of course excellent, but to use them in the midst of a pandemic and do mass vaccination, because then you provide within a very short period of time the population with high antibody titers, so the virus comes under enormous pressure. I mean, that wouldn't matter if you can eradicate the virus, if you can prevent infection. But these vaccines don't prevent infection, they protect against disease. But in the meantime, we are not realizing that we give all the time during this pandemic, by our interventions, the opportunity to escape to the immune system. And that is, of course, a very, very, very dangerous thing, especially if we realize that these guys, they only need 10 hours to replicate. So if we think that by making new vaccines and new vaccine against the new infectious strains, we are going to catch up, it's impossible to catch up. I mean, the virus is not going to wait till we have those vaccines ready. I mean, this thing continues. And as I was saying, the thing is, I mean, if you do this in the midst of a pandemic, that is an enormous problem. And so it's not like, okay, you missed it. Okay, let's try again. No, you did some harm. I mean, this is different from drugs. Immunizing somebody is installing a new software on your computer. Don't forget, I mean, these antibodies, they will be recalled every single time you're encountering a coronavirus, right? I mean, you cannot just erase this. But the problem I'm talking about is a global problem. It's not an individual getting an adverse event. It's a global problem of, making this virus increasingly infectious because we leave it all the time a chance, an opportunity to escape the immune system, and to drive this, to whip this up, up to a level where the virus is so infectious that we can even no longer control it. Because, I mean, these highly infectious strains, some people think, oh, the virus is going to calm down and it will insert a number of mutations, just to be gentle and kind with us. That's not going to happen.
We're coming to a point where people are going to have to take these vaccines. That looks as though it's the reality, either in the context of work or in the context of travel. Based on what you're saying, they're in a lose-lose situation. What does this mean?
At some point, and I'm sure people can challenge me on this, but reality will prove it. I think we are very close to vaccine resistance right now. And it's not for nothing that already people start developing, new vaccines against the strains, etc. But what I was saying is that, okay, if you miss the shoot, okay, you could say nothing had happened. No, you are at the same time losing the most precious part of your immune system that you could ever imagine of. And that is your innate immune system. Because the innate antibodies, the natural antibodies, the secretory IgMs, will be outcompeted by these antigen-specific antibodies for binding to the virus. And that will be long-lived. That is a long-lived suppression, and you lose every protection against any viral variant or coronavirus variant, etc. So this means that you are left just with no single immune response. With it's none. Your immunity has become nihil. It's all gone. The antibodies don't work anymore, and your innate immunity has been completely bypassed. And this while highly infectious strains are circulating. So I mean, if that isn't clear enough, I really don't get it.
So Martin, we're not going to say we agree or we don't agree.
No.
But let's just summarize what he is saying. He's saying that you have injected a material that creates a very specific, powerful antibody. In actual fact, if I may add, you have actually changed your system into an antigen producer to which you have responded naturally by creating the antibody, a highly specific antibody. And every time that you are infected with the coronavirus, this induced immune response will be activated. What he's basically saying is that, in his opinion, this is such a powerful response that your own natural immunity, which covers any base, has been eliminated, basically put to sleep.
Yeah.
Because the stronger ones that you have induced, but which are highly specific for one strain, will now take over. Now, what if the strain changes?
Yeah, that this one doesn't recognize.
That this one doesn't recognize, and your own response is limited because this stronger response, which is unnatural, has been introduced. Then you will be defenseless. That's what he's saying. And then he says the future will tell whether he is right or whether he is wrong. Now, I'm not making a value judgment. That's just the fact of the matter. In other words, if you have to make an informed choice, you have to ask yourself the question, am I willing to perhaps sacrifice my natural immune status for the sake of this one strain that has a very low potential of killing me in the first place? Do I want to take that risk? Because in the future, things could be 10 times or hundreds of times worse. Mm-hmm. That's what he's saying. We're not making a value judgment. All right, that was one source. Now, here's another source, an independent source from Fox News from 3 April 2021. Surgeon warns blanket vaccination of U.S. population could be a dangerous medical approach. If someone is natural immune, there's no reason to go and revaccinate them. Those persons would actually be an unnecessary medical procedure. This is a very unusual thing, he said. We are literally in the middle of an outbreak where millions of Americans are naturally infected or naturally immune, deploying a vaccine that essentially reactivates their immune responses. So the question is, number one, is that necessary medical treatment? Number two, is that a dangerous medical approach? So what's he saying? He's saying people have become sick. Thousands upon thousands have become sick with the coronavirus. And they have overcome it, and therefore now they have a natural immunity which your own body has produced. Mm-hmm. Is it right to now activate them with this new inoculation?
Yeah.
Because the point is, what is this inoculation? It's actually a genetic modification that enables you to produce the antigen to which you will produce the antibody, which you should already have if you've had the sickness. And then again, if you couple it to what the previous speaker said, then you will be locked into that system, and again, you will deactivate your own immune response. So is this a wise practice or is it not? This is a question that people will have to ask themselves.
Yes. Can I just, to try and understand if I'm correct, so this is like if you got flu for this year. After you got the flu, you get the your shot for the flu that you got.
Yeah, but remember, those that we used before were not of the same nature as the ones that have been developed now, where you're actually using RNA or DNA to make your own system produce the antigen to which you then produce the antibody. So this is a totally different system. So he's asking this question. Here is a case in point. The New York Times reported that Argentina's president tests positive for coronavirus despite vaccination. So in other words, the vaccination doesn't stop you from getting the virus or spreading the virus. Mr. Fernandez joins a list of world leaders who have contracted the virus, including Andrés Manuel López Obrador of Mexico, and then the President of Brazil, and Emmanuel Macron of France, and Donald Trump of the United States during the final months of his presidency. But Mr. Fernandez appears to be the first of those leaders to test positive for COVID-19 after having been fully vaccinated. Russia's Gamaleya Institute, which developed Sputnik 5, wished the president well and said that while the vaccine has an efficacy rate of 91.6%, it is fully effective in preventing critical cases. So it has an efficacy, but it doesn't prevent you from spreading it. Now, one of the arguments in the world out there is that you must take it for the common good,
Yes.
to prevent you from spreading it. Some people will go so far as to say if you don't take it, you become a murderer.
Yes.
Now, this, of course, negates that argument. Here's another one from The Guardian. COVID, new vaccines needed globally within a year, say scientists.
Geert van den Bosch warned against this.
Exactly. That's what he did. He said that this is what is going to happen. Because we have a highly specific virus. We have now created a highly specific, very effective immune response. And any variant won't be recognized, so you need a new vaccine.
And he said also, you're going to play catch-up the whole time.
Exactly. So you're always going to run behind. Now, where does your natural response come from? From your immune system.
Yes.
Right? Now, what if your immune system has been put to sleep?
Correct.
This could be very serious. This is what he's suggesting. We don't have any proof of that, but this is something that you must take into consideration when you consider these things. So the planet could have a year or less before first-generation COVID-19 vaccines are ineffective, and modified formulations are needed according to a survey of epidemiologists, virologists, and infectious disease specialists. So there are many people saying this.
Yes.
We're going to run this risk. Question. When you make a choice of this nature and there is a possibility that you will be deactivating your own immune system, which has kept you alive until now,
Yep.
then would you want to take that risk? The grim forecast of a year or less comes from 2/3 of respondents, according to the People's Vaccine Alliance, a coalition of organizations including Amnesty International, Oxfam, UNAIDS, who carried out the survey of 77 scientists from 28 countries. Nearly 1/3 of the respondents indicated that the time frame was likely 9 months or less. So they assuming that variants will be around, and now you will be dependent upon the scientific world to pull you through. How many people are on this planet?
7 billion.
So will you get your vaccine on time to cope with the new variants? That's the question. Unless we vaccinate the world, we leave the playing field open to more and more mutations, which could churn out variants that could evade our current vaccines and require booster shots to deal with them. Now, I find this very interesting. Unless you vaccinate the world.
Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, in this article, they give the blame of this new vaccines needed because everybody's not been vaccinated yet.
That is what they're saying. But in the previous statement, it was because they've been vaccinated that we have the new variants. So which of the two sides are you going to back? It's like gambling. You're backing a horse, but you do not know which horse you're going to back, right? Okay, here's another article from Fox News. US seeing fourth wave of coronavirus infections due to variants. So now they're saying the variants are already there, so we're not waiting 9 months. And already, right in the beginning, they were saying there was a new variant from South Africa. There was a new variant from Brazil.
Yes.
And was it close enough to the original that the vaccines could still cope with it? There was doubt about that issue or otherwise. I believe that in some ways we're almost in a new pandemic, Osterholm told Fox News Sunday host Chris Wallace. The only good news is that the current vaccines are effective against this particular variant, B117. Scientists were concerned that the variant, which proved to spread far easier than the original coronavirus, might also render recently developed vaccines useless. again, my question is this. If the vaccine has taken over basically the immune response and curtailed your own immune response, how long are you prepared to play this game? Or would you rather rely on your own immune response that has an unlimited capacity to deal with variants? It might not be as fast, it might not be as effective in the beginning, but once it has created the immune response, you should be immune and you should be fine. So this is where the question of health reform comes in.
Yes.
I'm asking the question, under these circumstances, with the decision that you must make, how willing would you be to have a powerful, natural immune response? What would you do to get it?
Anything.
Anything.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what if I told you, Martin, that you already have it? And that it was built into your system by an all-wise, all-knowing God who so loved you that he gave you the means of protecting yourself from the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
But then, he also told you, Martin,
Yes.
Martin, if you want this machine to run optimally, don't mix diesel and petrol. Or gas, as the Americans say. It could be a very bumpy ride. Make sure you use the right fuel. And let me tell you about that fuel. I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree with fruit on it. It shall be yours for food. And seeing, Martin, that the world has become changed and that there is a curse upon the world, I also give you the green plants, the plants of the field, to augment your diet with the necessary phytochemicals to give you an absolutely superb immune system. Would you opt for it?
Yes.
You would think it would be a good idea under the circumstances? Okay. So let me just go back to my own research. When we did the research on the various animals, one of the parameters we always tested was the immune capacity of the animals when they were on a plant-based diet or on a animal protein-based diet. And it was always amazing to us that when the animals were on a plant-based diet, they had optimal immune capacity.
Yeah.
So one of the first defenses, no matter what animal you're talking about or which human you are talking about, is plant-based diet is the way to go. Now, that is what Dr. Campbell found out in his China study.
Yes.
And he received quite a lot of backlash from the scientific world until the science was established to such a point that you couldn't really argue the facts anymore. I experienced exactly the same in my research. Exactly the same. And that's why I had such a rapport with the man when I started.
Well, it hasn't actually changed.
No.
There's a continuing debate.
It's a continuing debate. But the fact of the matter is that plant-based is the way to protect yourself. Now, under the situation of disease, to create the natural environment in which to cope with the disease, that's another scenario. There are ways in which to enhance your immune capacity and to allow it to run its course. Because as we read there right in the beginning, fever, when you are sick, is not your enemy.
No.
Excessive fever becomes the enemies. So you need to learn how to control the situation and understand what the role of fever is, for example. And if you can manage this in a natural way, using simple methods like water, for example, then you can achieve great things. So let me become predictive for a while. And let me put it to you this way. No matter what is coming upon the world, whether it is via what these people are saying or not, there will come a time when you will have to rely on your natural immune system to take care of a problem. And if the problem is extremely acute, you will have to learn to use natural methods to deal with the problem. And it would be wise to start
Early.
now. He referred to the variant as a game changer and insisted that the focus needs to be on getting through the next 2 or 3 months. As long as people continue to receive vaccinations and follow basic health guidelines, including hand washing, mask wearing, and social distancing. Now again, when you look at the sanitizing and the mask wearing and the social distancing and all of these, isn't there just as much of a debate concerning the efficacy of these methods?
Correct.
Absolutely, and each one of them is equally debatable. Some people say you need to wear up to 5 masks at a time, and others are saying that is depriving the body of the necessary oxygen and increasing the carbon dioxide load to the system, which is very negative. And if you want to develop a strong immune system, well, then you must be exposed to the various parameters. Now, a child, when it is born, basically has no immune response of its own. So it inherits the learnt immune response of the parent, and in that first milk receives a whole host of antibodies to cope with whatever there is in the environment. And then a child will naturally expose itself to environmental issues and put sand and whatever, even gross things in its mouth that'll freak the parent out. But by doing this is introducing elements into the body to which the body reacts.
The immune system kicks in.
And it kicks in, and the little child will have many, many episodes, but eventually will come out with an immune system that is ready to cope with everything. Keeping a person isolated, some people will now argue, is to actually curtail that capacity to deal with anything new that arrives. And we have some examples in history. For example, some of the islands, like the Hawaiian Islands, when the first settlers came there, they brought with them diseases that they weren't used to. And many of those people died in large numbers because they'd never been exposed to anything like it and could not muster the immune response to deal with it. So we could have a very similar situation. History tends to repeat itself. But we're speculating. We've just heard that there will be new possible epidemics coming, and the politicians have warned about this as well. So let's listen to what Angela Merkel has to say on the issue.
Merkel says the coronavirus crisis in Germany has taken a dangerous turn.
We basically have a new pandemic. The mutation from Great Britain has taken over, which means we have a new virus. Of course, of the same kind, but with very different properties. It is clearly more lethal, more contagious, and contagious for longer.
So, Martin, again, the question, if it's a new virus, do you need a new response?
You need a new vaccine. It's interesting, just to, if I'm watching this, that Van der Bosch said that there will be these new mutations because of these vaccinations. And what's interesting for me is that all these countries that have these mass vaccinations happening are the ones that's saying there's a new pandemic now.
Correct.
USA, UK, Germany.
This creates tremendous uncertainty, and people will climb onto the barricades and say, well, we've had enough of this. So, Martin, is there going to be an escape out of this cycle that you have now introduced? You've now entered the cycle where there's a problem which potentially has produced a problem which has to be solved, which produces another problem which has to be solved, and eventually you will have to have more and more draconian rules to deal with it, right?
Yeah, these lockdowns that we've been having.
And so people are not necessarily complaining about the vaccines, but they are complaining about the other issues like the lockdowns. Yeah. So let's have a look at this issue.
1 year into the COVID-19 pandemic, and tempers across Europe seem to be fraying. Anger at lockdown measures and other restrictions has spilled out onto the streets. On Saturday alone, there were protests in Croatia, Sweden, Finland, Belgium, Poland, Austria and more. In the small Swiss town of Liestal, almost half of the population turned out to denounce the partial lockdown that has been in place since mid-January. Faced with rising infection rates, Germany has hinted it may reverse recent relaxations in restrictions. That didn't go over well with the over 20,000 protesters marching through the streets of the town of Kassel, where clashes broke out with police and multiple arrests were made. But the largest protests were seen in London. Despite the UK having the best vaccination rate in Europe and a roadmap out of the pandemic, thousands vented their anger at Boris Johnson's lockdown, which has been in place since just after Christmas, resulting in clashes with police.
This looks like a recipe for civil unrest.
Yeah. It's clear that people are not happy about the way that governments have been enforcing lockdowns and restricting movement.
Okay, so even if you get the vaccine program down pat, as is the case in the UK, there will be new and new and new variants, so it looks like a never-ending cycle that could continue for a long time. Now, let's just look at official figures for detrimental effects of the vaccine itself. This is something that is not very prominent in the media. This comes from Health Impact News, and they quote various sources. Here they quote UDRA Vigilance, European Database of Suspected Adverse Drug Reaction Reports. Now, these are official reports from the bodies that deal with these issues. So these are not alternative news reports. And they claim that the COVID-19 vaccine adverse drug reactions have caused 4,576 deaths thus far, 199,213 injuries through March 20, 2021.
That's the accumulation of all the adverse effects and deaths for those 4 vaccines.
Yes, and then they mentioned the vaccines down here. Now, that's quite substantial. And what is interesting is that most of these organizations claim that the report level is at about 3%. Mm-hmm. So this is a fraction of what really is happening out there, according to official figures. So here's another one which talks about the total reaction for the experimental vaccine, which is basically the biotech Pfizer vaccine, and it talks about 2,906 deaths, 111,508 injuries up until 2021. And you will see that Italy, France, the Netherlands, Spain, Germany, Portugal, etc. are leading the way when it comes to these. Now, the governing bodies and the World Health Organization will counter this kind of information by saying that yes, there are adverse reactions and there are even deaths, but the benefits still outweigh the negatives.
Yes.
Now, with this kind of data available, if you were a parent, Martin, and you had a young child, and you were told ahead of time that X number is going to die or have very detrimental reactions to whatever procedure is now going to be undertaken, particularly in the light of it being something that is unlikely to kill you in the first place, then you have to weigh the odds and make a decision whether you want to go along with this or not, right?
Mm-hmm.
Again, we're dealing with personal choice. Here's a breakdown, and we can see the list is really quite substantial, and some of the figures are very high. 8,286 blood and lymphatic system disorder, including 17 deaths. 5,094 cardio disorders, including 326 deaths. 25 congenital, familial, and genetic disorders, including 2 deaths. And we can go down the list. Here, for example, 25,177 gastrointestinal disorders, including 144 deaths, or 6,662 infections and infestations, including 302 deaths. The list is quite substantial. The last one over here, 5,401 vascular disorders, including 99 deaths. Now, a list like that seems somewhat problematic, so one really would have to weigh the odds. Is this the way to go, or is there an alternative?
Like you said, this is substantial information that you have to take in consideration when you decide if you're going to go along with this or not.
Exactly. You have to make an informed decision.
So I will maybe also encourage people, do some research. Yes. Don't just run with what mainstream tells you or what anybody tells you. Do your own research.
Yes, do your own research and take into account what the mainstream tells you and balance it with other information. Now, what's also interesting is there have been a number of court cases, quite a few of them, in fact, that have been initiated because of the pandemic and because of vaccinations in general. And here, for example, court orders sought to protect public health and health freedom of all Americans. And vaccination causes an 800% increased risk of chronic illness in children. So this is some of the court documentation that has been presented to the courts in order to fight these cases.
Yes. What happened also in this court case, with the information that they supplied as supporting documents, they did a survey of 49 states of the United States about people that have never been vaccinated, and they were weighing up how many effects they had through their life according to people that have been vaccinated.
Yes.
And then you get some staggering results, like for instance 1,248% better health for unvaccinated adults.
Now, there have been some studies with certain population groups, like the Amish, for example, where they also refuse medication, and their health status compared to people living in the same state. And those have also been very interesting. And this has opened up a whole debate where there are many, many people that are involved. And again, this is not something you will hear generally in the mainstream. But the issue of vaccination is not a settled issue and a settled science at all. There's a lot of debate around it, and people need to be able to make informed choices. Now, one of the issues that was very prominent, of course, was the issue of blood clotting that led to deaths. COVID-19, 7 UK blood clot deaths after AstraZeneca vaccine. And many countries, including South Africa, halted the AstraZeneca, and then it was declared safe again. So the BBC reported that 7 people have died from unusual blood clots after getting the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine in the UK. The medicines regulator has confirmed to the BBC. The Medicines and Healthcare Product Regulatory Agency says the benefits continue to outweigh any risk. However, concern has led to other countries, including Germany, France, the Netherlands, and Canada, to restrict the vaccine's use only to older people. Now, that to me is a very strange phenomenon, because are elderly people at a lower risk for blood clotting, or are they actually at a higher risk? This is something you have to ask yourself. And if someone, let's say like myself, who has been subjected to flight thrombosis, because I flew a lot, and it's a very common thing that people get flight thrombosis, and with all my flying, I did contract flight thrombosis. So there is a tendency for blood to clot. Then I have to weigh very carefully, do I want to put something into my body that will enhance the clotting capacity, or do I counteract it? Now, I counteract this propensity with a very natural diet, which makes sure that the clotting parameters in my blood are kept at a level where they should be. Now, Martin, what is fascinating to me is that they changed the name of this vaccine. So here's a report from Euro Weekly. AstraZeneca vaccine changes its name. And the World Health Organization again said that the benefits outweigh the risks. Now, that's a very easy statement to make. But if I feel, for example, that I would be at risk from blood clotting, then I would certainly try to avoid this particular vaccine.
Yes. But now when they changed the name, how are you going to know that you're going to be...
Unless you do very thorough research. That's why I always say, Martin, if you want to do shopping in the world today, you better learn how to read.
Correct.
Right? Because a supermarket shelf used to be something that provided all my wants and my needs. And whatever my eye delighted in, I put into my basket. These days, it takes me a while because I have to first read what it says on that label.
Yes, the ingredients.
Correct. And by this time, I have more or less sorted that out in my mind, and there are very few shelves on the supermarket, in the supermarket, that I can still use.
And
every now and then there's a new product. And then I have to put on my reading glasses. Now, very often, the ingredients are written in microdot fashion. So perhaps very soon I will have to take a magnifying glass with me in order to see what's in them.
The other problem now is it's medical names most of the times these days.
Or has E-numbers.
Or E-numbers.
So now you have to have a little booklet with you.
Yeah.
That tells you what the particular E-number is. So if they have to hide it behind the E-number, then it's probably good to avoid it.
That's a good.
So there's very little left that is actually worthwhile buying. It makes life very complicated. So it's the same thing here. You have to do some very careful research. Remember, we're talking about choices. and how to make informed choices. Now, what is also interesting, that this webpage reports that in Hanover, many doctors and staff did not come to vaccination. On Saturday, a week ago, 600 doctors and practice staff from the city and region of Hanover were supposed to be vaccinated. However, only 200 people who want to vaccinate appeared at the date. That means that 2/3 of the medical staff didn't pitch up for their vaccination. Were they considering the consequences, or didn't they have time? We don't know. The fact that 2/3 do not come to vaccinate is a frightening number and a frightening signal, said the region's finance department responsible for the vaccination center. So these are issues that you have to take into consideration.
In this case, the reason is that they had reservations about the AstraZeneca vaccine.
Correct. But when we saw that previous list, we saw that the other vaccines were also very high on the list and very prominent in adverse reactions.
Yes.
So you can't say one or the other. Now, this one over here is about Donald Trump actually pushing for the vaccines.
The 21st March marches that they had around the world against, well, all sorts of the lockdowns and everything that we've seen, where he showed an article where they said that QAnon supporters is organizing those marches.
Correct. And they also stated that most of the pro-vaxxers are Democrats and that the anti-vaxxers are Trump followers. Now, it's interesting that Trump himself was a pro-vaxxer. So how all of this fits together is just interesting. This is just for interest's sake.
And one thing we did, we took a big bet on this. We started manufacturing the vaccine before we really knew it worked. We saved many, many months and millions of lives by doing that, because you wouldn't have the vaccine right now if we didn't take that chance. We knew what we were doing. We knew that we felt strongly it was going to work. And we took a risk, and the risk was spending billions of dollars to develop it before we knew and before we had the approval that it was going to work. It works incredibly well, 95%, maybe even more than that. It works incredibly well, and it's really saving our country, and it's saving, frankly, the world.
So, Mr. President, I know that you received the vaccine. Mrs. Trump also got the vaccine. Would you recommend to our audience that they get the vaccine then?
I would recommend it, and I would recommend it to a lot of people that don't want to get it, and a lot of those people voted for me, frankly. But, you know, again, we have our freedoms, and we have to live by that, and I agree with that also. But it's a great vaccine, it's a safe vaccine, and it's something that works. And we've been working round the clock, and what I got the FDA to do, this would have happened. This would have happened in many, many years from now if I didn't get involved, and if we didn't get involved.
So the landscape has changed a little bit since then, and the debate has opened up. But the fact of the matter is that the Donald Trump era was one that was very pro-vaccine.
It's interesting that he mentioned that they took a risk. They actually took a gamble on it. They didn't know if it's going to work.
Correct. All right, so we've looked at some of the statistics, and we've asked ourselves, why are some of these statistics not readily available or prominent in the mainstream media so that people can make an informed choice? Now, at the risk of being called a conspiracy theorist again, which is nothing unusual, is there an agenda other than the vaccination? And one of the issues that is now becoming very prominent is the one of the Green Pass. Mm-hmm. Now, Donald Trump made it quite clear that, as far as he was concerned, choice was something that is inherent and should be part and parcel of humanity. It's part of your human right to make a choice. And I agree with that. But it seems now that they want to make it mandatory. But the government doesn't really want to push this angle, so they are wanting the rest of the world, the private sector, to push the issue as well. So here you have the economic world and the government working in unity to achieve something. So this one is a bit tongue-in-cheek. How you think mandatory vaccination will work. They will force you to line up under military guide, and then you will get vaccinated whether you like it or not. But how it will actually work, some people say, is you won't be able to buy or sell. Card declined. In other words, you will need a green pass.
Mm-hmm.
So, Martin, if the science is not absolutely settled, if there is a vast debate out there, should we not? And if people had a free choice to choose or not to choose, then why are we seeing this push towards a green pass? And let's just look how far this has gone.
What's also, what comes to mind, you remember Van der Bosch, the first thing he asked the World Health Organizations and the people is for a debate, an open debate on scientific, let's talk about this.
But there's no debate.
No.
There's only a one-sided agenda.
And once again, this is what we've been doing since the beginning. We try to put in perspective where all of this is heading.
This is what we're talking about. So we're not actually taking a side for or against. We're saying open the debate. We agree with that. People need to be informed. You cannot make a choice if there's no choice to be made.
And we don't say the vaccine is good or bad or anything. But is there a plan?
Is there an agenda behind it?
Yes.
Yes. So here we have a video on RT. Let's just look at that.
Assuming you want to enter, you have to have what is called a green passport. It's issued after persons received 2 vaccinations 21 days apart. And in a month's time, just opposite the hotel, you won't be able to enter shops like this. You won't be able to enter supermarkets, gyms, shopping centers, synagogues. In fact, you won't be able to go just about anywhere in Israel unless you have a green passport. It comes as the government steps up efforts to vaccinate the population. It's being met with mixed reaction on the street. Jerusalem plans to ban unvaccinated people from certain jobs and has warned that anyone found forging vaccine certificates will be jailed. A black market for counterfeit certificates is thriving on Telegram, where already 100,000 users have joined groups that promote forgeries. Vaccine hesitancy and skepticism have become a growing concern in recent weeks as Israel's world-leading inoculation program slows down. Just under 2 million Israelis have not received either of the 2 shots, and many say they don't plan to. It's forcing the government to come up with new incentives to encourage people to receive shots.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are very happy to host you in the world's first ever vaccination bar.
I think it's a good idea, yeah. I think there are a lot of people that are just lazy.
More people come because of Canopy, and I hope everyone will come and will keep themselves safe.
All right, so they've given the people some incentives to become vaccinated and then to be able to get a green pass.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as we've heard, you'll probably have to be vaccinated again and again and again. So, very interesting. All right, let's look at another angle.
It's called the Green Passport. We're not told to wear it, but what they have done is they have essentially overnight created a second-class citizenry, a true medical apartheid that is disallowing healthy, law-abiding, tax-paying citizens from entering their places of culture if they do not participate in this experiment. It's that simple. We've been told there are people who have been kicked out of their choirs, out of their pools, out of their gyms. I don't know who's going to hear the message we're saying. I don't know what is going to become of it. You really have a people that have been so debilitated that, how many people the government says take this injection, so fine, it doesn't feel right, but okay, I'll go and do it. Because let me just get out of this already.
All right, so these are some of the incentives to make you get a green pass. In other words, a mechanism has been put in place whereby you can buy or sell. Mm-hmm. Is it based on absolute efficacy of the vaccine?
No.
No. Mm-mm. Because with any change, you will have to do it again, okay?
New vaccine.
But a mechanism has been put in place.
Correct.
Okay. Now, what about the other countries? This is an important question, right?
Yeah.
Is it going to be just Israel? Here's life site, wristbands and dining cards. New army policies exclude, isolate, unvaccinated. So you have the same system in the US Army. Mm-hmm. You're going to have a kind of green pass. Saudi Arabia launches health passport for COVID-19 vaccine recipients. So here again, you need a health passport. You need to prove that you were part of the program. Otherwise, you cannot partake in travel or other activities, right?
Correct. You can't go to the gym.
Can't do anything.
Nothing.
All right, here you have Ireland and Tennessee, who is the second in command in Ireland. Says additional freedoms will be granted to people once they have been fully vaccinated. And then Leo Varadkar has confirmed the government is developing a digital green certificate vaccine pass for people to prove they have been fully inoculated. So there is an agenda. You have to now prove that you were inoculated. Mm-hmm. And as we have heard, some people say if you do not become inoculated, then you are basically an enemy. You are even a murderer because you might infect other people.
Yes.
But as we've seen, the vaccine doesn't protect you at all from transmitting the virus, so that argument is nonsensical.
And if you have been vaccinated, you can still get it as well.
Exactly.
So.
Here's the Business Insider. New York launched COVID-19 digital vaccination passport that will let people go to concerts, sports games, etc. And sooner or later, will you be able to go to the store to buy food?
Well, no.
Here's the BBC News, COVID passports. What are different countries planning? EU leaders have backed introduction of a digital green certificate, but some countries inside and outside the EU have already announced plans for vaccine passports. So this is coming to your part of the world, like it or not. Mm-hmm. It is a means of controlling buying and selling.
Yes.
This does not mean that it is the mark of the beast.
No.
Some people say that even we have said that this is the mark of the beast. No. The mark of the beast is a very specific something.
Yes.
And it has to do with the beast, which is by definition Roman Catholicism and its acclaimed mark of authority.
Correct.
But what we have here is a method of controlling buying and selling. That's all.
Mm-hmm.
Let's continue. Germany. So the NRW doubles down on shopping restrictions after a court ruling. Now this is very interesting, Martin, because here was a court ruling and the government ignored it.
They're totally the opposite.
Let's read it. Germany's western state of North Rhine-Westphalia has extended coronavirus restrictions on shops after a court ruled the existing measures on retail businesses were unfair. So the court ruled that they weren't allowed to restrict, and they've doubled down. The court's decision on Monday meant that mandatory visitor appointments and limitations of customers per square meters in stores would be dropped with immediate effect. In response, the state has stretched the customer booking requirements and limitations to include shops that were initially exempt. So they not only ignored it, they broadened it.
Yeah, made it more stringent.
So this begs the question, is there another agenda?
And who's the authority now? You've got courts saying one thing and the government just, we don't care what the court says.
Now, Martin, just for the sake of completeness, there are some people that say there is a hidden agenda and there is a conspiratorial angle to this. And this is an interesting video clip that deals with this number 33, which is, of course, a very prominent number in Freemasonry. And they're dealing with the logo of the United Nations and certain information that has come out. For the sake of a complete debate on this issue, let's be brave or daring and show this as well.
We had some link to Freemasonry and the medical fraternity in our initial statements.
Correct.
So it's interesting, when we look at the United Nations flag, we can see that they have the globe divided into 33 different sections. So it wasn't long after the World Health Organization designated the pandemic on March 11th on the 33 that we started finding more and more stories with the 33 number in them.
Today, and I say as of today at this hour, we have 33 confirmed positive tests.
That brings, those are 11 new cases, 22 go to 33.
As we sort through this here in Arkansas, today we have 33 confirmed positive cases in Arkansas.
As of today, we have 33 confirmed cases with Boston residents.
We have 33 Pennsylvanians who have tested positive for COVID-19.
So as of this morning, there were 33 cases in North Carolina.
In the past couple of hours, there are now 33 confirmed cases of the coronavirus in Michigan.
More cases of the coronavirus were confirmed today in San Luis Obispo County, bringing the total number now to 33.
What shall we call that, Martin? Coincidental, interesting information.
Just say that again.
Coincidental, interesting information.
Yes.
Now, here's a very interesting video, and it's dealing with a previous situation, the H1N1 virus. And the man here is Dr. Mark van Ranst. Now, this Dr. Mark van Ranst is, of course, a professor at a prominent Catholic university. And in the introduction, it is in Belgian. So the language will be foreign to the listeners. Basically what they're saying is they're introducing him as the top virologist who was in control of this particular situation in 2019, and that he then was the one who reported to Chatham House, which is a very important think tank for world leaders. And that part will be in English. So bear with the little piece of the foreign language and let's see what transpired there, because this is very interesting.
Is een fragment van een lezing die Belgisch topviroloog Mark van Ranst op 22 januari 2019 gaf in het Chatham House. een belangrijke non-profit organisatie in Londen, waar eveneens de belangrijkste personen op aarde samenkomen om de wereldproblematiek te bespreken.
To tell you about my experiences being the crisis manager, the flu commissioner for Belgium and highlighting the communication aspects there. And then you have one opportunity to do it right. I mean, day one is so important. In day one, you start your communication with the press, with the people, and you have to do it right. I mean, you have to go for one voice, one message. In Belgium, they chose to appoint a non-politician to do that. I mean, I have no party affiliations, and that makes things a little bit, at that time at least, a little bit easier, because you're not attacked politically, majority, minority. That doesn't come into play, and that was a huge advantage. The second advantage is that you can play in Brussels the complete naive guy and get a lot more done than you would otherwise be able to do. You have to be omnipresent that first day or the first days, so that you attract the media attention. You make an agreement with them that you will tell them all, and if they call, you will pick up the phone. When you do that, then you can profit from these early days to get complete carpet coverage of the field, and they're not going to search for alternative voices there. And if you do that, that makes things a lot easier. And then you have to say, okay, well, we will have H1N1 deaths. Of course, that would be unavoidable. I used there Sir Donaldson's quote, where he said that in the UK, by the peak of the epidemic, 40 people would die per day at the end of the summer. So 62 at that time million people in UK, 40 deaths a day. I worked it out for Belgium. That would be 7 deaths a day at the peak of the epidemic. I used that in the media. 7 Belgian flu deaths per day at the peak of the epidemic would be realistic. That is true in every year, even interpandemically. That is very, very conservative. However, talking about fatalities is important, because when you say that, people say, wow, what do you mean? People die because of influenza? And that was a necessary step to take. And then, of course, a couple of days later, you had the first H1N1 death in the country, and the scene was set and it was already talked about. And then you had to pick who is going to be vaccinated first. And then, well, women and children first, whatever. I mean, risk groups, they were important. And then I misused the fact that the top football, soccer clubs in Belgium inappropriately and against all agreements vaccinated they made their soccer players priority people. So I said I can use that, because if the population really believes that this vaccine is so desirable that even the soccer players would be dishonest to get their vaccine, I said, okay, I can play with that. So I made a big fuss about this. This is Van Ranst is raving mad.
Now, Martin, what is interesting about this is the way in which they played it. They got the media's attention. Mm-hmm. They saw to it that all other role players were eliminated. They used statistics in advance, which were statistics which were common to every single year of flu season. Mm-hmm. So nothing amazing, but when you mention it, of course, in deaths per day, etc., it becomes very alarming to people. Exactly the same thing happened with the COVID.
Yes.
Because the death rate was not higher than in a normal flu season. Mm-hmm. And what is also very interesting is how they used prominent people or sports bodies or favorite teams to make the point that vaccination is extremely desirable. And I can see very great parallels between what happened there and what is happening today. Mm-hmm. So this should make people think, right?
Correct.
So, Martin, let's fast forward to the COVID epidemic and see how they use celebrities to do exactly the same thing.
If you want to get back to your favorite places and feel confident they have put your health and safety first,
look for the Well Health Safety Seal.
Look for the Well Health Safety Seal.
Look for the Well Health Safety Seal.
You'll see it at schools, offices, banks, childcare centers, all the places we go.
The Well Health Safety Seal means that we'll feel better going into restaurants,
theaters, stores, hotels,
stadiums, and all the places that we love.
Everything may look the same, But the Well Health Safety Seal means that your health and safety are top of mind when it comes to
cleaning and sanitizing procedures,
air and water quality management,
emergency preparedness programs,
and health services.
So look for the Well Health Safety Seal outside
and feel more confident going inside.
The International Well Building Institute is the brainchild of a former Goldman Sachs partner. Its parent company is worth around $800 million. And you guessed it, if you want a well health safety rating, it'll cost you. It'll cost you upwards of $12,000. Lady Gaga, Robert De Niro and Serena Williams don't come cheap.
So, Martin, is there an agenda to get people to conform to certain norms and standards?
There's probably a blueprint and a game plan.
Now, Martin, here's something that's very interesting. This is a document from the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security. This is one of those practice scenarios that they had, and it was in 2017. And they called it the SPARS pandemic, a futuristic scenario for public health risk communication. And in this practice run, they predicted that this would happen between 2025 and 2028. Now, this document is available on the internet, and people can download it and have a look at it. And what is so fascinating is that the playbook, if I can say it like that, is precisely what is happening in the world today.
Yes. Even some of the Twitter messages that was portrayed that will go out in that scenario, even the language and the Twitter hashtags are the same that actually went out.
So it looks like a blueprint, right?
Yeah.
Except that the date is 2025 to 2028, and maybe the devil knows that his time is short and he shifted it this way a little bit, right? Let's not go there. We could be date setting, which is a dangerous thing.
Another thing that is also interesting if you read through that report is that the way that in that scenario, how they deal with people that are against what they're saying in the mainstream media.
In other words, they will run down certain forms of treatment and enhance others.
Yeah, yes, but when people talk against, for instance, the vaccine that they will be developing, they will take them off social media, they will censor them, they will get fact checks that counter this. So before you actually get to the person saying something, you've got already 10 fact-checking systems in place before that. It's really similar to what you've got going now.
Now, Martin, we are talking about all of these things in connection with end-time scenarios. And people are saying, this is just coincidental that all of these things have happened now. And we've been saying from the beginning, no, this is part of prophecy. And this is the little time of trouble or the preparation for the little time of trouble at the least. Because we can see certain things being put in place. The buying and selling issue being very prominent at the moment. So when we look at all of these things and we're putting it into the prophetic picture, then the story becomes far more interesting. And we should be far more alert because we're supposed to be watchmen on the walls of Zion. Now, obviously, when you implement something like this, and there is an agenda, let's assume that there is an agenda, then there will be collateral damage and there will be fallout. We've seen riots, we've seen all of these things, and we see that people are actually at risk, and some people will die as a consequence. Now, surely there's a certain ethical side to this. And it is amazing to me how the opinion of the world in terms of ethics has changed.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was young, would they have done the things that are now part and parcel of society? Would they have been as readily accepted 20, 30 years ago as they are accepted now? For example, just take the abortion debate, which is a major. And when is a child a living human being, and when is he just an entity to be dispensed with?
Yeah.
That is an ethical debate. So obviously, in this scenario, there will also be an ethical debate. And I think this is a very important debate, and how these people think is really phenomenal. And if you are of the older generation and you haven't been desensitized, then your ears should prick up. Of course, if you have been desensitized, you might think nothing of it, right? So let's just have a look at the ethical debate. This is the Corbett report, which was a very important report, and it was very shocking. I mentioned it in one of my previous talks, or in our previous talk. Let's just look at it.
And so the access that used to be available to the middle class or whatever is just rapidly going away. That's a trade-off society is making because of very, very high medical costs and a lack of willingness to say, you know, is spending $1 million on that last 3 months of life for that patient, would it be better not to lay off those 10 teachers and to make that trade-off in medical costs? But that's called the death panel, and you're not supposed to have that discussion.
On November 10th, 2020, Joe Biden announced the members of a coronavirus task force that would advise his transition team on setting COVID-19 related policies for the Biden administration. That task force included Dr. Ezekiel Emanuel, a bioethicist and senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. He has argued that the Hippocratic Oath is obsolete and that it leads to doctors believing that they should do everything they can for their patients rather than letting them die to focus on higher priorities. He has argued that people should choose to die at the age of 75 to spare society the burden of looking after them in old age.
So there are two kinds of rationing, you might say. One is absolute scarcity leading to rationing, and that's when we simply don't have enough of something and you have to choose between people. We do that with organs for transplantation. We don't have enough. Some people will get it, other people won't, and tragically, people will die. Similarly, if we ever have a flu pandemic, not if, but when we have a flu pandemic, we're not going to have enough vaccine, we're not going to have enough respirators, we're not going to have enough hospital beds. We're just going to have to choose between people.
In a 1968 article in defense of killing babies with Down syndrome or other kinds of idiots, Fletcher wrote, "The sanctity, what makes it precious, is not in life itself, intrinsically. It is only extrinsic and bonum per accident, ex casu, according to the situation. Compared to some things, the taking of life is a small evil, and compared to some things, the loss of life is a small evil. Death is not always an enemy. It can sometimes be a friend and servant." In Practical Ethics, for example, intended as a text for an introductory ethics course, Singer dispenses with arguments about severe handicaps and birth defects, and talks more broadly about whether it is fundamentally immoral to kill a newborn baby, noting that a newborn baby is not an autonomous being, capable of making choices, and so to kill a newborn baby cannot violate the principle of respect for autonomy. After conceding that it would, of course, be difficult to say at what age children begin to see themselves as distinct entities existing over time, noting that even when we talk with 2- or 3-year-old children, it is usually very difficult to elicit any coherent conception of death, we could provide an ample safety margin for such concerns by deciding that a full legal right to life comes into force not at birth, but only a short time after birth, perhaps a month. Take Alberto Giubilini and Francesca Minerva, 2 bioethicists working in Australia who published a paper titled After Birth Abortion, Why Should the Baby Live? In the Journal of Medical Ethics in 2012. In that paper, they explicitly defend the practice of infanticide on moral grounds, claiming that the moral status of an infant is equivalent to that of a fetus, and thus The same reasons which justify abortion should also justify the killing of the potential person when it is at the stage of a newborn. Lest they be mistaken for forwarding the same old argument on killing severely handicapped newborn babies that bioethicists have been making for decades, the two are careful to add that their proposal includes cases where the newborn has the potential to have an at least acceptable life, but the well-being of the family is at risk.
It's important to recognise that mandatory vaccination would not be anything new. There are many mandatory policies, other coercive policies. Taxes are a form of coercion. Seatbelts were originally voluntary and they were made mandatory because they both reduce the risk of death to the wearer by 50% and also to other occupants in the car. But importantly, some people do die of seatbelt injuries, but the benefits vastly outweigh the risks. Some countries in the world already have mandatory vaccination policies. In Australia, the no jab, no pay policy involves withholding childcare benefits if the child isn't vaccinated. In Italy, there are fines, and in the US, children can't attend school unless they're vaccinated. All of these policies have increased vaccination rates and have been implementable.
Some form of vaccination passport is almost inevitable. With travel, it's virtually a given. And you look at countries like Israel's now introducing the green card, and all this is going on the assumption that people that have been vaccinated are not going to be able to spread the virus as easily, meaning they can't transmit it.
As the events of the past year have borne out, the public are more than willing to consider the previously unthinkable now that they have been told that there is a crisis taking place. Forced vaccination, immunity passports, the erection of a biosecurity state. For the first time, the eugenics-infused philosophers of bioethics are on the verge of gaining real power, and the public is still largely unaware of the discussions that these academics have been engaged in for decades. At the very least, Bill Gates can relax now. We can finally have the discussion on death panels.
Well, Martin, all I can say to this is that maybe these panels should have an audience with God and see how far they get with their ideas. But be that as it may, we are interested in prophecy. So some people just won't have the right to live. Now, I don't know whether you know or whether the audience knows, and doesn't really bother me, but I am 72 years old, so I only have 3 years left to make a decision whether I want to survive after that time. But be that as it may, prophecy tells us one very important thing. It tells us, leading up to the mark of the beast, you will not be able to buy or sell. Correct?
Correct.
And that is there apparently to coerce you to comply to whatever add-on they want to put onto the green pass.
Yes.
If the green pass should be a stepping stone to bringing about the situation that you cannot buy or sell, right? All right? If that doesn't convince you, is it possible that you could be declared a danger to society?
Yes.
And that according to this ethical standard, this new norm, which seems to be part and parcel of government thinking, as we have seen, that a death penalty could be initiated? Do you think so?
Yes.
So do you think it's possible for people and governments with this kind of information to institute death penalties for non-compliance?
Yeah, because you're a danger to society.
I see. Let's leave it at that.
So you're a danger for the well-being of others.
Okay. Let's just make it quite plain again. We're not choosing sides in any way. We're looking behind the scenes to see if there is a progressive move in the direction that prophecy foretold. Now, we've had this gentleman on the screen many, many times, but he's well into his 80s, so he better watch out for the ethical decisions that are being made in the world today. Anyway, it talks about corporatocracy. Great Reset will wipe out the middle class and medium-sized enterprises, says the Deutsche Wirtschaftsnachrichten. And it says the Great Reset is so-called corporatocracy project in which power and government will come from the corporations. Increase in prosperity for the few, economic equality under reduced conditions, including universal basic income for the rest. Anyone who sees the Great Reset initiative of the World Economic Forum only as the creation of a new economic model in accordance with the guidelines of stakeholder capitalism is mistaken. The initiative aims to change our thinking, our way of life, our eating habits, and our interaction with each other sustainably. So here you have a whole package deal. You either think this way or you are a virus.
Yes.
This is the kind of thinking that we find in Thomas Aquinas, the darling of Roman Catholicism and its thinking, where a cancer in society needs to be excised as a necessity. And with this kind of thinking, we are certainly on the road towards that.
We're heading somewhere.
So how far are we down the road with this? Let's just have a look at this clip from Sky News.
Well, just following on what I was saying about Daniel Andrews, it was 25 years ago that the then president of the Czech Republic, Václav Havel, spoke at our National Press Club 25 years ago. He talked about a crisis of authority from the perspective of Czechoslovakia of one who'd suffered totalitarianism. Now think of it. As Kevin Andrews said, from the Prime Minister down, quote, the daily media conferences of the Victorian Premier, the possessor of all detail, the bearer of all knowledge, continually blaming the citizenry for the failures of his administration. Well, we ought not to imagine that this isn't leading us somewhere. But of course, to suggest it might be is to be accused of dealing with conspiracies. But from coronavirus, we have seen the growth of state power. And even though in the world there are 104,000 patients with coronavirus who are critical, that represents 0.0013% of the population. Yet leaders are hanging on to this power. No doubt they view individual freedom as an optional extra, not an inalienable right, and want their new powers to become a normal part of governing, unquote. Much of the quote-unquote expert advice relied upon has been exposed as politically biased, not scientifically based. Well, back to my point. What is the agenda here? Do we just assume that the liberties and freedoms and economic advantages that we've taken for granted for so long are safe and secure? The World Economic Forum, remember it. They say that after COVID, climate action must be top of the agenda. And the forum's founder and executive chairman is a professor, Klaus Schwab, an 82-year-old German economist who is co-author of a book called The Great Reset. 3 big words. To quote, make society fairer, smarter and greener, and to get humanity off the road to climate catastrophe. This fellow Schwab has said, quote, the changes we've already seen in response to COVID-19 prove that a reset of our economic and social foundations is possible. Well, it goes without saying that Trump was a major obstacle to all of this, hence the emphasis on a decarbonised economy and talk that, quote, companies should serve all stakeholders, not just shareholders. Is this a threat or is it not? I think we're kidding ourselves if we don't take this seriously.
It's interesting that he says Trump was a major obstacle to them. But it's interesting in the video clip that we saw that Trump was instrumental to get the vaccine rolled out when they had to take a risk in knowing if it's going to be effective.
Correct. So, some prominent people in the past have said that nothing in politics happens by chance. And we've always been of that position, that we are watchmen. So basically this man is saying what we are saying on a slightly different level, but nevertheless, this is what people are observing. Now, Martin, we are coming from a totally different angle. We are looking at prophecy. We are not taking sides, we are playing observer. We're saying this over and over again, but I think it's important that people understand where we come from. Now, here is an article from CNW, and it says, stay home on weekends. Jamaica Prime Minister imposes lockdowns for the next 3 weeks. To curb the spike in cases, Jamaicans will have to stay at home for the next 3 weekends. The lockdowns would begin from midday on Saturday to Monday at 5 a.m. during the Easter holidays. The lockdown will commence on Good Friday, April the 2nd, to about 5 a.m. on April the 6th. It's interesting to me that it wasn't only in Jamaica, but Germany did exactly the same thing. Yes. And other countries were still under lockdown and either came out or are still not out.
Correct.
So we're having this scenario all the time. And we've spoken about Sunday being the mark of the beast for a very, very long time. Now, let's just reiterate why we say Sunday is the mark of the beast for those who are new to this kind of debate. Protestantism, in all its interpretations of prophecy, have always maintained that the beast of Revelation 13, the first beast, is Roman Catholicism. It has the exact same criteria as the little horn power, the Antichrist power in Daniel chapter 7. So that was that power, and that the second power, the United States of America, the leader of the free world, or the New World Order if you like, will be the one driving the world into the acceptance of the mark of that beast. Now, the only one who can tell us what the mark is that beast itself. And that beast has consistently maintained throughout history that the mark of its ecclesiastical power is that it transferred the solemnity of the seventh-day Sabbath, Saturday, to Sunday. And therefore it is above the Bible, and it is a higher authority than God himself in his word. That's basically it. So it is a choice between whose authority do you accept in the world.
Yes.
Correct? Now, we've been dealing with this whole COVID issue, and we've been saying consistently that this is a method or a possible stepping stone in implementing the methodology which will eventually enable them to enforce the mark of the beast.
Correct. What's interesting for me in this article is, if you go to the Great Controversy, it tells you that the Roman Catholic Church made up miracles, false miracles, to show the sacredness of keeping Sunday holy. And then they put in laws that prohibited you to do any work from the Saturday at 3 o'clock or so till the Monday. Now we've got the same type of lockdowns. It's instilling the thoughts in the people's minds that that period is okay to not do anything and it's for the common good.
That's very interesting. So they will use this to further their ends. And basically, again, it's an issue of authority. This could then be a direct affront to God in terms of his authority. We've seen all the little erosions of God's authority in the legislations that have come up until now. But the final straw will be to totally negate God's authority. Another example is here in India, extends Sunday lockdown to 4 more districts. So again, Sunday is being pushed.
And the same time periods, from Saturday till Monday.
Humanity is being led in this direction. Now, to end this discussion, because we could go on forever, I think we should look at this issue from the angle of prophecy and the final message of warning to humanity. Isaiah chapter 63 verse 12 reads, and this is referring to the Exodus, that led them by the right hand of Moses with his glorious arm, dividing the water before them to make himself an everlasting name. So here it refers to the power of God and the right arm of his majesty. The power is symbolically in the right arm. So basically, by leading them by the right arm of Moses, he is asserting his kingship, his rulership over everything. And the opponents, the Egyptians, were destroyed in that exercise. If we go to the book Christian Service, we read again and again, I have been instructed that the medical missionary work is to bear the same relation to the work of the third angel's message that the arm and the hand bear to the body. Under the direction of the divine head, they are to work unitedly in preparing the way for the coming of Christ. In fact, it says in the Spirit of Prophecy repeatedly that the health message is the right arm of the gospel, and it is the right arm that is attached to the third angel's message, which warns against accepting the mark of the beast. So the health message is linked to the message warning against the mark of the beast. Question: is the health message therefore the mark of the beast?
No.
No. It is linked to it.
It's a system.
It's a part of the system. It is not the mark of the beast. The mark of the beast is the self-acclaimed power of Rome that it shifted the day, which proves that its authority is higher than God's authority. So by simply keeping the day, if you are forced to do so, this is a very important point. If you are forced to do so, you are acknowledging the authority of the church. If you have been presented with the choice between God's authority, which is the seventh day, and the church's authority, which is the first day of the week, Sunday, and you have to make that choice as to whose authority is paramount in your life, then it becomes a different issue. Then you are choosing between the mark of authority. It is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever that God is the one that sanctifies you. So that's his mark of authority. It is the seal in his law, as opposed to Roman Catholicism. Now you have to make a choice. You either choose the mark of the beast or you choose the mark of God. And if you choose neither and you think you can get away with it, you won't. Because in this game, there's no sitting on the fence.
No.
There's no lukewarm. You're either hot or you're cold. So you have to choose one or the other. It's a question of life and death. Who's your life giver? Now this is the important point.
Yes,
who is your life giver? And how do you maintain life? Through the health of your body.
Correct.
Okay, so it's a matter of choice. So the right arm of the body of truth is to be constantly active, constantly at work, and God will strengthen it. But it is not to be made the body. At the same time, the body is not to say to the arm, I have no need of thee. The body has need of the arm in order to do active, aggressive work. Both have their appointed work, and each will suffer great loss if worked independently of the other. So the medical missionary work is the arm.
Yes.
And it is associated with the final warning to the world. Let's just think about that for a second, Martin. The final warning to the world has a health component. And it says to the world, God is your life giver. God will take care of you. God wants you to live according to His directives and according to His blueprint. He's the one who made you. He's the one who designed you. He's the one who gave you your immune system to deal with whatever the world has to throw at you. Do you think that if the health message is associated with the warning against the mark of the beast, do you think that the enemy will have a health message associated with his real mark of the beast?
Definitely.
Okay. Now what if he says, I have a health message for you. I am your life giver. You have to do this, that, and the other, including perhaps taking a vaccine, or else you are a threat to others. And if you accept this, then you will be able to buy and sell and live normally like everyone else. But if you don't, we will isolate you.
Mm-hmm.
And we will make sure that you will be deprived of the very things that you need to live a normal life until you come to your senses. What do you call something like that?
Coercion.
Coercion. Forcing you in a particular direction, right? Now, if you say, I don't want to do that, and the measures don't work, what if the next step would be, if you don't do this, then you are a cancer in society, and you have to be removed.
Mm-hmm.
And we will make a death decree, and we will make sure that we remove you. Now, that death decree doesn't come with a vaccine.
No.
That death decree comes with the mark of the beast. So now, let's say you have the mechanism in place that you cannot buy or sell if you do not accept the vaccine.
Yes.
Is it possible to add pieces to that legislation?
Definitely.
What could you add?
Well, the climate change.
Climate
Everything.
Climate change and climate lockdown legislation, which says that you have to take a day off, and that day has to be Sunday.
Correct.
And on any other day, you have to play your part in society. And if you don't want to do that, then the restrictions become greater.
Yeah.
And eventually the restrictions become so great because there's no doubt that the climate change legislation is the next card that is going to be played.
Klaus Schwab said it.
Klaus Schwab said it. Biden said it. They're all saying it.
Yes.
All right? We've shown that over and over. That's the next card that will be played. Then the mechanism will have been put in place. It's not the mark of the beast, but it's the controlling mechanism to control those who refuse to accept it.
Correct.
And then eventually it will escalate to the point of a death decree.
Yes.
So here's another question. Is this something that will happen right at the end, or should our minds already start thinking along these lines and saying incrementally, I must beware that I do not get trapped into a system that coerces me into something that I do not want to do?
That's what I've been saying from the beginning. Looking for the Sunday legislation is not going to be a singular event.
No.
It's not going to be, oh, here it is now.
No.
It's going to be like this, leading up to it. And if you're going to be tested, not just there,
incrementally,
all the way up to there.
And if you don't learn to, at some point or other, say, but this goes against my moral conviction, but for the sake of, I will go along with it.
Like that lady said.
Then eventually you will also be able to say, well, it doesn't really matter,
Exactly.
It's been decreed this way. Let's just go along with the flow.
Yeah, that lady said, although we don't feel like it, let's just get it over already.
Let's just do it and get back to normal. So this is the bottom line. This is not just about a vaccination program. This is not just about a green pass. This is leading to the very final events predicted in the Bible. And we are not setting any time. We don't know when it will be. But we can certainly see the incremental steps that are leading to the very point of decision, whether you either accept the mark of the beast or you don't. That decision is yours and mine and yours alone. Nobody has the right to coerce you. You make that decision. Not even God will force you one way or the other, but the consequences will be eternal. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we are living in such serious times, and the world is being channeled to a point of decision. And we have to decide, is the channel process that is happening in the world at the moment a chance occurrence in the stream of history, or is there an agenda attached to it? Many will say, Lord, that if you say there is an agenda, that this is conspiratorial thinking. But if we look at all the facts, each one of us has to decide individually where we stand with regards to this issue. May your Holy Spirit work with us and with humanity so that choices can be made which lead to eternal life, is my prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.